The package arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, the kind of day where the sky seemed to cry along with your broken heart. Natalie Bennett stood in the narrow hallway of her tiny studio apartment, holding a cream-colored envelope that felt heavier than it should. Her hand shook as she traced the gold lettering embossed on the front. Inside was an invitation to witness her own humiliation, dressed up in elegant script and expensive cardstock. Ryan Mitchell, her ex-boyfriend of 4 years, was getting married. The wedding was set for 6 weeks away at the most exclusive vineyard in wine country. But it was the handwritten note tucked inside that made her stomach twist into knots. The words were written in Ryan's familiar slanting handwriting, each letter a small dagger to her heart. Natalie, I hope you can attend and see how happiness truly looks. No hard feelings. Bring a date if you can find one. The casual cruelty took her breath away. 3 months ago, Ryan had ended their relationship in the parking lot of her favorite coffee shop. His words still echoed in her mind like a haunting melody she could not escape. He told her she lacked ambition, that her dreams of being a freelance graphic designer were childish fantasies. He said he needed someone who matched his rising status as a corporate lawyer. Someone polished and connected. She had spent the following weeks moving back into a cramped apartment, taking on a part-time job at Henderson's Books to supplement her irregular design income, and trying to glue together the shattered pieces of her self-worth. Now this invitation felt like Ryan wanted to grind those pieces into dust. The collision of fate. The bookstore, where Natalie worked, was a quiet sanctuary tucked between a busy coffee chain and a vintage clothing boutique. It smelled of old paper and possibilities, with tall wooden shelves that reached toward the pressed tin ceiling. She loved this place, even though it barely paid her bills. On Thursday morning, Natalie was restocking the fiction section when her vision blurred with tears. The invitation had been haunting her for 2 days. She could not eat, could not sleep, could not focus on anything except the image of Ryan standing at an altar with someone else. Looking back at her with pity or worse, satisfaction, she did not see the customer approaching until it was too late. She turned quickly, her elbow catching a display of hardcover classics. Books tumbled like dominoes, and she stumbled backward, directly into someone solid and warm. Her coffee cup, balanced precariously on a nearby shelf, flew through the air and splashed across an expensive-looking coat. Oh no, I am so sorry," Natalie gasped, her face burning with embarrassment. She grabbed a handful of napkins from the checkout counter and began dabbing frantically at the spreading brown stain. "I was not paying attention. I will pay for the cleaning. I am so sorry." "Please stop apologizing," a calm voice said above her. "It is just a coat." She finally looked up and found herself staring into the most striking gray eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell slightly across his forehead. He wore the stained coat over a simple white shirt and dark jeans, but something about him suggested wealth and refinement. His expression was not angry. Instead, he looked concerned, his gaze searching her face with unexpected gentleness. "You look like you are carrying the weight of the entire world," he observed quietly. "Would you like to talk about it?" The kindness in his voice, so unexpected from a stranger she had just drenched in coffee, broke something inside her. A sob escaped before she could stop it. She pressed her hand over her mouth, mortified. "I am Theodore Kingston, but everyone calls me Theo," he continued, as if her emotional breakdown was the most natural thing in the world. "And I think you need a friend right now more than I need a clean coat." The garden conversation an hour later. After her shift ended, Natalie found herself walking beside Theo through the botanical garden, 2 blocks from the bookstore. The evening air was cool and fragrant with jasmine and roses. String lights twinkled in the trees overhead, casting everything in a soft golden glow. She had not planned to tell him everything, but somehow the words poured out. She told him about Ryan, about the invitation, about feeling like she was not good enough. She told him about her dreams of building her own design business, and how Ryan had made her feel foolish for wanting something beyond a stable corporate job. Theo listened without interrupting, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. When she finally finished, emotionally exhausted, they had reached a secluded bench overlooking a lily pond. The water was dark and still, reflecting the stars beginning to appear overhead. "I understand more than you might think," Theo said quietly. He sat down on the bench and gestured for her to join him. "I am supposed to merge my family's investment company with another firm through a strategic marriage. My father has been planning it since I was 20. The woman is accomplished and appropriate, and I feel absolutely nothing for her. Every day feels like walking toward a prison cell with a smile on my face." Natalie turned to look at him, really look at him. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. Here was someone who seemed to have everything, and yet he was just as trapped as she was. "So we are both stuck," she said softly. "Maybe not," Theo replied. He turned to face her fully, and something shifted in his expression. A spark of mischief lit his gray eyes, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. "What if we helped each other get unstuck?" "What do you mean?" "Marry me," he said simply. Natalie laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "You are joking. I am completely serious." Theo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Think about it, Natalie. You walk into that wedding on my arm. Not broken, not alone, but married to someone who can make your ex-boyfriend choke on his own smugness. And I walk into my next family board meeting and tell my father that his merger marriage is impossible because I already have a wife." The idea was insane. It was reckless and impulsive and potentially disastrous. But as Natalie sat there in the garden, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air and the stars bright overhead, she felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. Wild. Dangerous. Intoxicating hope. "This is crazy," she whispered. "The best things usually are," Theo replied, extending his hand toward her. "What do you say, Natalie Bennett? Will you be my partner in this beautiful disaster?" She looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, at the genuine warmth in his eyes. She thought about Ryan's cruel note, about the years she had spent trying to be enough for someone who would never value her. She thought about Theo's quiet desperation, his own cage of expectations. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. "Kay," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Let's do this." The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the city clerk's office, creating patterns of light and shadow on the scuffed linoleum floor. Natalie stood beside Theo, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The reality of what they were about to do hit her with the force of a freight train. Last night in the garden, under the romantic glow of string lights and starshine, their plan had seemed bold and perfect. Now, in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a government building, it felt terrifying. Around them, other couples waited their turn. A young pair whispered and giggled, clearly in love. An older couple held hands with the comfortable ease of people who had found each other again. And then there was Natalie and Theo, as two strangers about to tie their lives together for all the wrong reasons. Theo must have sensed her rising panic because he turned to face her. "Natalie," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise of the busy office. "We can walk away right now. No judgment, no hard feelings. This is extreme, and I will understand completely if you have changed your mind." His offer was sincere, she could see that. He was giving her an escape route, a chance to retreat to the safety of her ordinary, painful life. But then she remembered Ryan's note, the casual dismissal in his words. The years she had wasted trying to mold herself into what he wanted. She remembered Theo's confession about his own cage, the life being forced upon him by family obligation. "I have not changed my mind," she said, lifting her chin with determination. "Have you?" A slow smile spread across Theo's face, genuine and warm. "Not even a little bit." A promise between strangers, the ceremony was nothing like the fairy tale weddings Natalie had imagined as a girl. There were no flowers, no music, no guests wiping away happy tears. A clerk with reading glasses perched on her nose and a coffee stain on her blouse read from a laminated card. Her voice flat and efficient. The words that should have been sacred and meaningful became just another transaction, like renewing a driver's license or filing paperwork.
Have you?
"Theodore James Kingston, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Theo said, his voice steady and clear. Do you, Natalie Rose Bennett, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Natalie opened her mouth, and for a heartbeat, no sound came out. Then she felt Theo's hand gently squeeze hers, a silent reassurance. I do, she whispered. By the power vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss if you wish, or just sign here. There was no kiss. Instead, Theo released her hand, and they both signed the marriage certificate, their signatures looking small and uncertain on the official document. When it was done, the clerk stamped the paper with a loud thunk that seemed to echo through the room. Just like that, Natalie Bennett became Natalie Kingston. They walked out of the building into the bright morning sunshine. The world looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but everything had changed. Natalie glanced down at her bare left hand, feeling strangely incomplete. Theo noticed her gaze. Wait here, he said suddenly, and jogged toward a small jewelry store across the street before she could respond. The ring that made it real 10 minutes later. Theo returned, carrying a small velvet box. He opened it carefully, revealing 2 matching platinum bands. They were simple and elegant, with a subtle engraving of intertwined vines along the outer edge. I know this whole situation is unconventional, Theo said, taking her left hand in his. But if we are going to convince everyone this is real, we need to look the part. He slid the smaller ring onto her finger slowly, the metal cool against her skin. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. Then he handed her the larger band and held out his own left hand. Natalie took the ring with trembling fingers and slipped it onto his finger, surprised by how intimate the gesture felt. They stood there on the busy sidewalk. Newly married strangers staring at the rings that bound them together. People rushed past them, caught up in their own lives, completely unaware that 2 people had just changed their entire futures on an impulsive bet against loneliness and expectation. Mrs. Kingston, Theo said, his voice carrying a hint of that mischievous tone from the garden. Ready for phase 2 of our plan? What is phase 2? Natalie asked. Shopping, he replied with a grin. We need to find you a dress that will make your ex-boyfriend wish he had never been born. The transformation the boutique Theo brought her to was located in a part of the city Natalie had only seen in magazines. The building itself was an elegant brownstone, with tall windows draped in silk. The name above the door, Mazen Colette, was written in flowing gold script that whispered of old money and exclusivity. I cannot afford anything in a place like this, Natalie protested as a doorman in white gloves opened the entrance for them. Good thing you are not paying then, Theo replied, his hand resting lightly on her lower back as he guided her inside. The gesture was casual, almost absent-minded, but it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. The interior of the boutique was like stepping into a dream. Soft, classical music played from hidden speakers. The air smelled faintly of roses and vanilla. Gowns in every color imaginable hung on racks that looked more like art installations than clothing displays. A woman with silver hair styled in a perfect chignon approached them. Her sharp eyes took in Natalie's simple jeans and cardigan in one sweeping glance, but her professional smile never faltered. Mr. Kingston, she said warmly, clearly recognizing Theo. What a wonderful surprise. How may we assist you today? Vivian Theo greeted her with genuine warmth. My wife needs a dress for a wedding. Something that will stop hearts and drop jaws. The word wife hung in the air between them. Vivian's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose slightly, surprise flickering across her face before she recovered her composure. Your wife, she repeated, her gaze moving to Natalie with new interest. Well then, congratulations are certainly in order. Let us find something absolutely perfect. For the next 2 hours, Natalie was swept into a whirlwind of fabric and fashion. She tried on dress after dress, each more beautiful than the last. There was a champagne-colored gown with delicate beading that made her look ethereal, a navy blue dress with a daring slit that showed off her legs, a blush pink creation with layers of tulle that made her feel like a ballerina, but nothing felt right. Each dress was beautiful, but they all felt like costumes. Like she was playing a part rather than being herself. Theo sat in a velvet armchair near the fitting rooms, his phone forgotten on the side table. Unlike the bored or impatient partners Natalie had seen in other stores, He paid attention to every dress, offering thoughtful opinions with surprising insight. He had a way of looking at her that made her feel seen, really seen. For the first time in years, "I have one more option," Vivian said, her eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone who had saved the best for last. "It just arrived yesterday from Paris. I think it might be exactly what we are looking for." The dress that changed everything. The dress Vivian brought out was the color of emeralds, a deep, rich green that seemed to glow with inner light. The design was elegant in its simplicity, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that flowed like water. The neckline was sophisticated without being conservative, the back dipped low, and there was a subtle shimmer woven into the fabric that caught the light. With every movement, Natalie slipped into the dressing room and put on the dress with Vivian's help. As she turned to face the mirror, her breath caught in her throat. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, but in the best possible way. The green brought out the hazel in her eyes, made her skin glow, emphasized curves she had forgotten she had. The dress did not overwhelm her or turn her into someone else. Instead, it amplified everything that made her uniquely herself. She felt powerful. She felt beautiful. She felt unstoppable. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the dressing room. Theo was scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Vivian, I appreciate your patience, but I am not sure any of these are quite right," he was saying without looking up. Then he looked up. The phone slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the marble floor. His jaw went slack, his eyes widening with an expression that was raw and unguarded. For a moment, he forgot to breathe, forgot to maintain the calm, controlled demeanor he always carried. He simply stared at her as if she were the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. The air between them crackled with sudden tension, a magnetic pull that had nothing to do with their business arrangement and everything to do with pure, undeniable attraction. Natalie felt her cheeks flush under the intensity of his gaze, felt her heart rate quicken in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness. "That one," Theo said, his voice coming out rough and low. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure, but his eyes remained locked on her. "Definitely that one." Vivian looked between them with a knowing smile. "I will have it wrapped immediately." As Natalie changed back into her regular clothes, her hands were shaking. Something had shifted between her and Theo in that moment, something neither of them had anticipated. Their arrangement was supposed to be practical, a mutually beneficial solution to their separate problems. But the way he had looked at her in that dress suggested their agreement might become complicated in ways they had not prepared for. When she emerged, Theo was standing by the window, his back to her. His shoulders were tense, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He turned when he heard her approach, and she saw that he had composed himself again, the mask of casual confidence back in place. But she had seen beneath it now. She knew what was there. "Ready?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Ready," she replied. Though neither of them was entirely sure what they were ready for anymore, the morning of the wedding arrived with golden sunshine that seemed almost mocking in its cheerfulness. Natalie stood in front of the full-length mirror in her apartment, staring at her reflection in the emerald dress. Her hair had been styled in soft waves that cascaded over one shoulder, and her makeup was subtle but striking. She looked like someone who belonged in the world she was about to enter. But inside, her stomach churned with nerves. Her phone buzzed with a text from Theo. "Cars downstairs. No pressure, but if we are doing this, we should probably arrive fashionably late for maximum impact." Despite her anxiety, Natalie smiled. Over the past 6 weeks, since their unexpected marriage, she and Theo had fallen into an easy rhythm. They had dinner together twice a week, sharing stories about their days. He had shown genuine interest in her graphic design work, even connecting her with 2 major clients. She had listened to his frustrations about his father's constant pressure to expand the family business. What had started as a transaction had begun to feel like friendship. And sometimes in unguarded moments, it felt like something more. But today was not about feelings. Today was about the performance, about showing Ryan and everyone else that she had not just survived, but thrived. Natalie picked up her clutch, took one last deep breath, and headed downstairs. The grand arrival, the vineyard, was even more spectacular than the photographs on the invitation had suggested. Rolling hills covered in neat rows of grapevines stretched toward distant mountains. The main building was an elegant stone structure with arched windows and a terrace overlooking the valley. White tents had been set up on the manicured lawn, and guests in expensive clothes mingled with champagne glasses, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. A black luxury car pulled up to the entrance, immediately drawing attention. The vehicle was understated but unmistakably expensive, the kind that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. Several guests turned to look, curiosity on their faces. The valet approached, but the driver's door opened before he could reach it. Theo stepped out. Natalie watched through the tinted window as recognition rippled through the crowd. She had done research on her husband over the past weeks, learning that Theodore Kingston was not just wealthy, but influential. His investment firm controlled significant stakes in dozens of major companies. He was known for being brilliant, private, and completely uninterested in the social scene that people like Ryan desperately wanted to join. Theo walked around the car with unhurried grace, his charcoal suit fitting him perfectly. He opened her door and extended his hand, his gray eyes meeting hers with a look that steadied her racing heart. "Remember," he murmured quietly, "you are the most stunning woman here. Let them see it." Natalie placed her hand in his and stepped out of the car. The reaction was immediate and gratifying. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The emerald dress caught the sunlight, making her seem to glow. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her hand firmly in Theo's as they faced the crowd together. A woman near the entrance gasped audibly. "Is that Theodore Kingston? What is he doing here? Who is she?" Another voice whispered urgently. Theo ignored the murmurs completely, his attention focused solely on Natalie. He lifted her hand and placed a gentle kiss on her knuckles, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and devastatingly romantic. The platinum bands on their fingers caught the light. It's impossible to miss. The confrontation, they moved through the crowd like royalty. Ice. Theo's hand resting protectively on the small of her back. Guests parted to let them pass, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright shock. Natalie recognized several people from her past relationship with Ryan, former friends who had quietly disappeared when the engagement ended. Now they stared at her with wide eyes and dropped jaws. The ceremony had not yet started, and guests were still arriving. Ryan stood near the entrance to the main tent with his bride-to-be, greeting people with the practiced smile of someone who believed this was his moment of triumph. His fiancée, Victoria, was exactly what Ryan had always wanted. She came from old money, had the right connections, wore a designer dress that probably cost more than Natalie's monthly rent. Ryan's eyes scanned the arriving guests with proprietary satisfaction until they landed on Natalie. His smile froze. His face went through a remarkable transformation, from smugness to confusion to shock to something that looked like panic. His gaze traveled from her face to the dress to the man beside her, then down to their joined hands and the unmistakable gleam of wedding rings. "Natalie?" Ryan said, his voice strangled as they approached. Victoria looked at him questioningly, clearly sensing the shift in his demeanor. "What are you doing here? And who is this?" The question was rude, dismissive, exactly the tone Ryan always used when he felt threatened. But before Natalie could respond, Theo stepped forward slightly. His movement was subtle, but deliberate, positioning himself partially between Natalie and Ryan. It was protective without being aggressive. A silent statement that she was no longer alone. "Theodore Kingston," Theo said, his voice polite but cold. He did not offer his hand to shake. "Natalie's husband. We came to offer our congratulations on your wedding." The word husband landed like a bomb. Ryan's face went pale, then flushed an ugly red. Victoria's eyes widened, and she looked between them with growing confusion. Around them, guests who had been pretending not to listen abandoned all pretense, openly staring at the unfolding drama. "Husband?" Ryan repeated, his voice rising. "That is impossible. You two cannot be married. You are just doing this to embarrass me, to ruin my wedding day." "Actually," Natalie said, finding her voice, and surprised by how steady it sounded, "your wedding is the last thing on my mind. We are here because you invited me, remember? You wanted me to see how happiness truly looks." She paused, letting the words from his cruel note hang in the air. "Well, I have found it. And I wanted to thank you. Thank me." Ryan sputtered. Yes, Natalie continued, her confidence growing with each word. Thank you for ending our relationship. Thank you for showing me that I deserved someone who values me exactly as I am. Thank you for setting me free to find real happiness. Ryan's jaw clenched. He took a step toward them, his hands balling into fists at his sides. This is ridiculous. You expect me to believe that you just happened to meet and marry Theodore Kingston in 3 months? You probably hired him to play this part, to make me look foolish. The accusation was absurd, but Natalie felt a flash of old insecurity. What if people believed him? What if everyone thought she was so pathetic that she would hire someone to pretend to be her husband? The protection before doubt could take root. Theo moved again. This time, he fully stepped in front of Natalie, his tall frame blocking Ryan's advance. His expression remained calm, but there was steel in his eyes that had not been there before. Let me be very clear, Theo said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. Natalie is my wife. Our marriage is legal, binding, and absolutely none of your concern. The fact that you would suggest otherwise tells me everything I need to know about why she is better off without you. Ryan's face contorted with rage and humiliation. You do not know anything about us, about what we had. I know enough, Theo replied. I know she is talented, kind, and stronger than you ever gave her credit for. I know she deserves better than someone who measures her worth by arbitrary standards of ambition and status. And I know that letting her go was the biggest mistake of your life, though you were probably too foolish to realize it yet. The gathered crowd was silent now, everyone holding their breath. Victoria had gone very still beside Ryan, her expression carefully neutral, but Natalie saw something flash in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or sympathy. Maybe Victoria knew exactly what it felt like to be measured and judged, to be valued for connections rather than character. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but Victoria placed a hand on his arm. Ryan, she said quietly but firmly, our guests are waiting. We should start the ceremony. It was a graceful exit, a way to end the confrontation without further embarrassment. Ryan looked like he wanted to argue, to continue the fight, but years of social training won out. He straightened his tie with jerky movements and forced his face back into a smile that did not reach his eyes. Of course, he said through gritted teeth. Then, unable to resist one final jab, he added, enjoy the wedding. Try not to cause any more scenes. The truth emerges, Theo and Natalie found seats toward the back of the ceremony space. Aware that every eye in the tent was on them rather than on the decorations or the wedding party, the ceremony began, but Natalie barely heard the words. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline still coursing through her veins from the confrontation. Theo's hand found hers in her lap, his fingers threading through hers in a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. But this time felt different. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, a soothing rhythm that gradually calmed her racing pulse. You were magnificent, he whispered, leaning close enough that his breath tickled her ear. Did you see his face when you thanked him? Despite everything, Natalie felt a smile tugging at her lips. I did. That felt good. It looked good too, Theo replied, and there was something in his voice that made her turn to look at him. His gray eyes were intense, searching hers with an expression she could not quite read. Natalie, I need to tell you something. Now, she whispered, acutely aware of the people around them, though everyone's attention was supposedly on Ryan and Victoria exchanging vows at the front. Especially now, Theo said. This whole plan, this arrangement, it was supposed to be simple. A solution to both our problems. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being an act for me. Natalie's breath caught. What are you saying? I am saying that when I look at you, I do not see a convenient solution anymore. I see the woman I want to wake up beside every morning. I see someone who makes me laugh, who challenges me, who makes me want to be better. I am saying that I have fallen in love with my own wife, and I have no idea if you feel the same way. The ceremony continued at the front of the tent, but Natalie heard none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the man beside her. To the vulnerability in his eyes and the hope and fear mingled in his expression, she thought about the past 6 weeks, about the dinners and conversations, about the way her heart lifted every time her phone buzzed with his name, about the hollow feeling when they said goodnight and went to their separate homes. "Theo," she said softly, squeezing his hand, "I have been terrified to admit this, even to myself, but I feel it too. This was supposed to be pretend, but it became the most real thing in my life." The smile that broke across Theo's face was radiant, transforming his usually serious expression into pure joy. Without thinking about where they were or who might be watching, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was not the polite, performative kiss of a fake relationship. It was passionate and genuine, full of weeks of suppressed longing and the relief of finally being honest around them. Several guests gasped. Someone giggled. At the front of the tent, the officiant paused mid-sentence, thrown off by the disruption. But Natalie and Theo did not care. They were lost in each other, in the perfect rightness of finally admitting what had been growing between them since that first coffee spill in the bookstore. The new beginning, when they finally broke apart. Both breathless and smiling, they found the entire wedding party and all the guests staring at them. Ryan looked absolutely apoplectic, his face red with fury at having his ceremony interrupted. Victoria, however, was hiding a smile behind her bouquet. "Perhaps we should go," Theo suggested, his eyes dancing with mischief. "I think that might be best," Natalie agreed. Trying and failing to look apologetic, they stood hand in hand and walked down the aisle between the rows of seats. Every head turned to watch them go, whispers erupting in their wake. But Natalie did not feel embarrassed or ashamed. She felt free, lighter than she had in years. As they reached the exit, Theo pulled her close and whispered against her hair, "So, Mrs. Kingston, where shall we go for our first official date as a couple who actually likes each other?" Natalie laughed, the sound full of genuine happiness. "Surprise me." "You are good at that." They walked out into the golden afternoon sunshine, leaving behind the wedding that was supposed to humiliate her and instead became the beginning of her real love story. Behind them, they heard the ceremony awkwardly resume, but neither looked back. 6 months later, Natalie and Theo would renew their vows in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by true friends and Theo's surprisingly supportive mother. Natalie's graphic design business would flourish with Theo's encouragement and connections, eventually expanding into a full creative agency. Theo would finally stand up to his father, choosing his own path and his own happiness. But that afternoon, walking away from Ryan's wedding hand in hand, they knew only one thing for certain. Their impulsive, reckless decision to marry a stranger had turned out to be the best choice either of them had ever made. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with love at first sight, but with two broken people deciding to fix each other and discovering that in the process, they had found exactly what they had been searching for all along. The emerald dress that had been chosen for revenge became a symbol of transformation. Natalie kept it in her closet, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the darkest moments, and that true happiness is not about proving anything to anyone except yourself. The end.